And we're admitting everybody. There we go. Hello, everyone. Give us just a moment. We're letting the room fill. You're joining us today with the second portion of the Ecotype Seed School, the first ever. We're always trying to do something cool and different with the Seed Conference, and this is one of those cool things. We're going to forego the entry slides today on this session because many of you are in the first session. My name is Heron Breen. I live in Central Maine. I'm speaking to you from Wabanaki lands. And I would just want to give the two primary things that matter. One is being respectful of each other. One mic when one person is speaking. If for any chance you're raising hands and asking questions, be respectful of the person that is speaking. The raise hands function is usually in your reaction toolbar, probably reaction button on your toolbar, or *9 if you're on the phone. You can also give folks reactions like thumbs up and applause through your reactions tool, which is great. But we're really trying to not, we're trying to take space. If there's anything, we're kind of rushing through this, please get up, stretch, take care of your body. We're hoping that we can all avoid too much jargon. So we'll try to spell things out as best we can, meet people where they're at with this, and also patience with Zoom. If you get bumped out or one of our speakers gets bumped out, we'll give folks a second to log back in or skip over to another portion. But if you get bumped out, please just log back in. And I would like to take a moment to, for all of us to recognize with a moment of silence, our Indigenous community, wherever you are, the lands that you live on, those that lived on, live with, and will live with in the future, the lands that we are occupying. If you know those places, please recognize them in the chat. If not, let's all just take a moment. Again, I'd really like to thank Sefra for all she's done, bringing this Ecotype Seed School together. It was a great partnership. So excited to have this part of our ongoing work in the seed community. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to Sefra to guide today's discussion and presentation. I know that Michael and Alexis are ready to go. Thank you, Sefra.
Thank you so much, Heron. Thank you to all the event organizers again. And so excited to be part of this conference. Welcome to the Ecotype Seed School Part 2, making history, folks. So glad that this is being recorded and can be shared and learned from by all. Hopefully, most of you now re-signed on from the first session. But before that, I'm Sefra Alexandra. I'm talking to you from the beautiful Connecticut lands, a word, an Algonquin word that means the long tidal river. We have that beautiful Connecticut River that runs right through our state. I'm from traditional Pagosset tribe land, which translates to the mouth of the river. And that's where these rivers and all of these seeds, seeds flow through or are dispersed many different ways, and hydrockery by water is one of them. So I just think of all these beautiful native plants and seeds that come all the way from the headwaters in Canada down out to the Long Island Sound to Matchemux, the beautiful land where I was born and raised. And in an effort to help proliferate and protect those living seed banks, the seeds in those soils where they are, I'm working with the Connecticut chapter of the Northeast Organic Farming Association. And we have the Ecotype project, which is our pollinator health initiative. And as we're working under a USDA specialty crop block grant, where our specialty crop are these ecotypic seeds, hopefully in session 1, that's where we talked about what ecoregions are, what ecotypes are, what native plants really are, and why they're so important. So if you missed that, it will be available as a recording on your app. But we're really focused on the education and including as many people as we possibly can in as many places to have the tools and resources they need to be implementing these ecotypic seeds on their land so that we can have these this eco-regional network to have the right plants in the right place and reducing fragmentation and really help encouraging this place-based restoration. And So in that effort, I'll put a survey in the link now, but I'll also put it in at the end. It would be so helpful if you all could fill out this survey so we know who you are, if you plan on implementing this on your landscape, if this seed school was helpful, all those sort of things. So please, before you leave today, fill out that survey. But without further ado, because we have quite a bit of content to cover, and just one note on that is Hope and Polly, who are the instructors from part 1, are monitoring the chat. We may or may not have time to field questions at the end, but please, any questions you have, put them in the chat, and we have brilliant minds who can help answer them in real time as they come up. So thank you, Hope and Polly, for facilitating that. And I would like to introduce our 2 instructors for today, 2 wonderful people, Alexis Doshas, I think I pronounced it right. Yep, okay, good. She is the propagator and facilities coordinator at Native Plant Trust. Native Plant Trust is kind of mecca for all of this knowledge and such an extraordinary resource. So we're so excited you can be here with us. So she is the propagator and facilities coordinator at Native Plant Trust, Nasami Farm, where they grow thousands of native seedlings from known wild ecotypic seed. She holds an MS in conservation biology from Antioch University, New England, and teaches many classes on propagation and native plant ecology. She also runs a small-scale medicinal herb farm, Forest Garden Farm, which specializes in native plants. So we're so glad that you can be here with us. And Michael Butts, a brilliant mind, and has been doing this work for almost a decade now, as I understand it. He is from Greenbelt Native Plant Center, that remarkable plant center that provides New York City boroughs with all their millions of native plants. Michael Butts is a native seed producer for the Greenbelt Native Plant Center, a New York City Parks Department facility on Staten Island. For the past 7 years, Michael has been cultivating and producing seed of over 75 native herbaceous species. The seed his program produces is used by regional contractors and restoration practitioners to restore native habitats throughout the New York City region. So now that we understand what ecotypes and ecoregions and native plants are, let's learn how do we actually put this on our landscape and work with these beautiful plants that are so important. So, Michael, over to you.
Yes, Sefra, thank you for that introduction. Polly and Hope, you really did a great job to seamlessly lead this section, session 2. I'll be covering a little bit, touching upon what you covered in the very beginning of this talk. So as Sefra mentioned, I work for the Greenbelt Native Plant Center, which is a New York City Parks facility on Staten Island. Joining me is Alexis Doshas from Native Plant Trust. She will be adding her perspective and how her operation goes about some of these processes. I don't know if Alexis, you want to say hello?
Hello. I'll say I am phoning in from Nipmuc land here in Whately, Massachusetts, along the Connecticut River, a little farther north from Sefra, and happy to be here.
Great. So in today's talk, we will be covering all aspects of native seed production, including wild population collection, establishing foundation seed plots and bulk seed production, as well as cultivation, harvesting, seed cleaning, banking, and warehousing, and then how to market and work with restoration practitioners, landowners, and organizations to get this eco-regional seed on the ground in the most successful manner. I would like to emphasize to the audience, anybody who's interested, or to just please keep in mind with the scale of native seed production, or which scale of native seed production would translate into the most appropriate and profitable enterprise considering your current operation. So I'm honored to have the opportunity to talk to organic farmers. I've always hoped NOFA would become a partner of the East Coast Native Seed Network. Organic, local, and small farms have a major potential to expand the native seed industry, especially here in the East. The Greenbelt Native Plant Center, along with MarsB, which is the Mid-Atlantic Regional Seed Bank, have been building partnerships for over 2 decades. So organizations are coming together and helping to develop this quote-unquote East Coast Native Seed Network. a lot of what I will touch on with respect to seed networks and ecotypes were covered really well, again, in session 1, and also Tuesday's roundtable if you attended that. And I've listed some of the partners here, and hopefully now we can add NOFA. So native seed is a huge industry in demand in the Western US. Large efforts are being made on the national level as regional seed networks come together. You can see that the National Seed Strategy's mission is to ensure the availability of genetically appropriate seed to restore viable and productive plant communities and sustainable ecosystems. So this is directly related to what we've been talking about, identifying genetically appropriate wild plant populations to establish foundation seed plots, increase the bulk production, and market this eco-regional seed. You can find the National Seed Strategy on the BLM website, and I'll also post a document with all these links and resources on the chat. So I'm just gonna go over this real quick because Polly and Hope did such a great job defining what native plant really means. So these are a few definitions that we use at the nursery to help us define what is native and how we can survey which populations to go about collecting. So this the first one here, the Native Species Planting Guide, I will provide that link for you as well. So native plants and pollinators are making their way more and more into legislation. The city of New York passed a biodiversity measure requiring any new installations on public lands to include native plants to increase biodiversity. And in 2014, the National Pollinator Health Strategy was signed. These laws are helping ensure the increasing demand for native plant material. And hopefully more and more organic farmers can become native seed producers to help meet this demand. All right, so for those of you interested in getting into the native seed industry, I would suggest that you consider your goals and the eventual size of your operation. How will native seed production fit into your existing operation without too much investment? And how will it be profitable for you? Here is a breakdown of some important points to consider for small scale versus large scale production. Obviously, the larger the operation, the more investments that will have to be made. Fortunately, if you are already set up as an operational farm, you probably have a lot of the proper equipment for propagation, cultivation, and harvesting. Large scale seed cleaning can involve more specialized and pricey machinery, but Alexis and I will cover that in more detail later in the talk. So with minimal added resources, organic farmers can diversify their product by producing and selling eco-regional native seed. So just kind of glancing at this, how I've broken it down, small versus large scale. If you're just getting into the industry and just starting seed production, you're talking about foundation seed or generation 0 seed that is plots established directly from propagated wild collected seed. And usually the plots are no more than about 500 square feet. The yield, depending on the species, can be less than 1/4 of a pound to over 3 pounds of pure live seed per year. Again, I'll go into a really good definition of what pure live seed means in a little bit. Hand harvesting, so small scale is mostly hand harvesting, hand seed cleaning, perhaps an investment of small machinery such as a tabletop clipper or a brush machine, and I'll talk about those as well. The good thing about the East Coast Native Seed Network is building these partnerships. So a facility like the Greenbelt Native Plant Center has a lot of this machinery ready to go. And if we really set up this network properly, it won't involve these investments for small farmers to get into these pricey machinery, and you can kind of ship off this material to your partners for cleaning. And Sefra and I have already started that this year. And I also have a partnership with Long Island Native Plant Initiative and Poly with their founder seed. So really for small scale, you're talking about select few species, specialty species that you're selling to niche markets, pollinator species, and that you would local and private citizens, other farms. You can start a cooperative with other local organic farms. So on the other side, and it's not a one or the other, it's a spectrum. As you get into this, you expand, you grow more and more species, and then you can start expanding your diversity so that you can actually have complete mixes and habitat mixes. So you're starting to get into bulk production, and bulk seed is generation 1 seed, which is plots that are established from foundation seed. And these plots are 3,000 square feet to multi-acres, depending on the species. Some of the large warm season grasses like little blue stem and broom sedge blue stem and Indian grass, they're going to be 60% of a mix, and you'll need like acres of that seed. They also have a large seed, so to get pounds of that seed, you're going to need large quantities to fulfill orders and do large scale restoration. So for bulk seed, you're talking about tens to hundreds of pounds of pure live seed per species per year. And it's, again, the development of complex regional habitat mixes. You can get into contract growing. So if you're a really small farm and you don't have the acreage to bulk out your seed, you can grow the foundation seed and then write up a contract with a farmer who has more acreage, and then they can be your bulk grower. So then, bulk production is really getting into more mechanized harvesting and seed cleaning. You're talking about enough seed for multi-acre habitat and regional restoration projects. And then again, with all of that seed, you're producing hundreds of pounds. You have to think about how you're going to bank it or warehouse it. And because the demand is so high, there's a great theory or a great approach that my director, Ed Toth, is trying to pioneer, is warehousing this seed. So hopefully we'll get to a point in the Northeast where we have the seed on hand and ready for these projects, and that's talking about warehousing. All right, so this is a good visual representation of the acreage that's needed for foundation seed plots. This is an aerial view of the Greenbelt Native Plant Center founder plots. Large quantities of native seed can be produced in relatively small areas, depending on the species. I imagine strips of seed production doubling as pollinator corridors that can be easily introduced to most farms. And at the Greenbelt Native Plant Center, our foundation seed plots take up an area less than 3 acres, in which I rotate 50+ species in and out of production. So this photo is taken facing north. The nursery and greenhouses are to the south, and you can see Manhattan on the horizon and Fresh Kills Estuary to the east. And here's another good visual representation of bulk seed production. I would say this is kind of in between foundation and bulk seed. This is as far as my production gets into bulk seed production. We have let out contracts in the past for large scale bulk production, but I'm doing this in-house. So in 2014, as a direct response to Hurricane Sandy, a partnership was formed amongst New York City Parks, National Park Service, and the Bloomberg Foundation. A plant nursery was established at Floyd Bennett Field in Brooklyn, one of National Park Service Gateway's sites. And National Park Service has lands totaling 27,000 acres surrounding Jamaica Bay and the lower New York Harbor. So as you can see on this map on the right, all the green highlighted lands are National Park Service lands. So this plant nursery provides native ecotypic seed and live plant material to restore both National Park Service and New York City Parks lands. So if you're looking at these pictures, each one of these plots or rows are about 1/12 of an acre each. I have up to 1/4 acre per species in production of some of the higher demand species. With regards to most wildflower production, this is a scale that can provide bulk seed regionally. So for this whole harbor and Jamaica Bay region. And I'm doing all of this organically with a 2-man crew. So it's me and we do have seasonal help with some of our staff, but it's really just me and an assistant that manage this 4-acre site here. So a really quick quote here from Douglas Talamy, who wrote Bringing Nature Home. As gardeners and stewards of our lands, we have never been so empowered and the ecological stakes have never been so high. I just still wanted to share this because this is a scene in Brooklyn along the west side of the Belt Parkway between the Verrazano Bridge and Coney Island during Hurricane Sandy. You can see these are benches here. Superstorm Sandy was a wake-up call and has led to a major increase in the region's efforts in its use of native plant material to enhance coastal resilience. All right, I've divided today's, or the talk today is kind of getting started now. I've divided it into 5 sections. Each subsequent slide will have the corresponding section highlighted in a box in the top left of the screen, so we can easily follow along. I will go quickly through wild seed collection, as I believe that has already been covered and linked during session 1, as well as ecoregions. But as discussed, wild collection is a step that is important to understand, but would hopefully be accomplished by a network of botanists once we really get this East Coast Native Seed Network rolling. So therefore, organic farmers would not have to employ resources in the wild seed collection efforts. I have bullet points under each of the 5 sections that are some key points to remember. So 1, we'll go through wild seed collection. Part 2 is cultivation propagation. And these will again be on each subsequent slide, so you can keep taking a look at these highlighted bullet points. Part 3 is harvesting and seed cleaning. Section 4, banking and warehousing. And then finally, practical uses with restoration projects and marketing to your clients and getting the seed on the ground. And then going from this to this, it's the same, pretty much the same deal. You might have seen this on Tuesday's roundtable, which is the seed cycle. Seed, just a good representation of the seed production cycle as a whole. So you start from wild seed collection through establishment, seed production on a large scale, harvesting, seed extraction or seed cleaning, and then banking. All right, so now into wild seed collection. I'm not gonna go really deeply into this because ecoregions were really thoroughly covered already, but we all understand why ecoregions are important to define where we're gonna be doing these wild collections and the habitats and ecosystems that are contained within those ecoregions. So here's an ecoregion map of the Northeast, and here's one. I just have this up as an explanation of why it's so much more in depth and detailed as compared to a hardiness zone map, because the hardiness zone map just kind of defines low mean temperature of where plants can live. And then a level 3 ecoregion map of the Mid-Atlantic. So yeah, again, ecoregions are defined by geology, vegetation, climate, soils, land use, wildlife, and hydrology. And then, within your ecoregions, it's good to understand the types of ecosystems. These are the ecosystems of New York City. Out of the 55 ecosystems, there are over 20 dominant ones that still remain today. Wetlands, grasslands, and forests are subdivided into more specific habitats. Many of these habitats can be found throughout the ecoregions of the Northeast. Alexis, do you have anything to add on ecoregions and wild seed collection from your viewpoint?
I think all that I would add is, getting to know, like, the ecosystems we always think of, especially in New England, for instance, as a very hard borders being the political boundaries of our states. And when you take a look at the ecoregions map, you can see that you can have very similar conditions, say along Long Island, that we see along the coast of Massachusetts. So you can see some of the same plants will be there in both places. So kind of redefining the way we think about plant communities and just separating out different political regions versus looking at the world as more of a habitat.
Great. Here's some photos of some ecosystems in my area. Again, a lot of similar ones all throughout the Northeast. Of course, New York City has a lot of coastal habitats. So the genetic health of our remnant native plant populations relies on the proper management of fragmented landscapes. Biodiversity is the richness of species, both animal and plant, that occupy a given ecosystem. Protecting and promoting biodiversity demands a multi-pronged approach of controlling invasive species, minimizing fragmentation, and using genetically appropriate plant material. And then the Seeds of Success was mentioned in session 1. It's a great resource, and you can find this on the Bureau of Land Management, blm.gov. And that's, if you're doing your own wild seed collection, this is the go-to tool here in this protocol. All right, so now on to part 2, propagation and cultivation. So before you do any kind of germination, as we all know, many or most native species require some kind of pre-treatment or cold stratification in order to germinate. Alexis, you would like to talk about some of the specifics on your stratification and pre-treatments?
Sure. I can talk a bit about the way we do it here. Again, we're a small scale nursery, but we choose to do it the most natural way, I guess I would say. So we sow our seeds in the late fall, early winter, and December, allow them to go through a cold period out in a greenhouse in the soil, and then bring them in to warm them up and get them to germinate in a warm greenhouse. So you can also artificially stratify in, depending on the species, in a fridge or cooler environment. But there are a lot of variations, especially with our native plants. Some require full 90 days. Some you can get to germinate a little quicker. Some of our more recalcitrant woodland species take several cycles of cold, warm, cold, warm. So they take a few years, you would say, to germinate in nature. So you can play around with that and try to trick them into germinating sooner. And that's some of the things that we do. But I would start, if you were starting out with native seeds, I would start with some easier ones that will either germinate readily or within a 60 to 90 day cold period. And Michael, how do you stratify your seeds there, Greenbelt?
Yeah, pretty much the same way. The woodies are a lot tougher than most of the herbaceous. I have up on the screen some examples of some treatments that we use for certain species. Asclepias milkweed is real straightforward with a cold, moist 45 days. Down the line, like some of the juncus, like wetter juncus, soft rush, up to 120 days, and we do a actual 24-hour soak. We dump them in water for 24 hours, and then actually leave them in water and just put them in the cooler for 120 days. Mm-hmm. And then some of the really tough seed coat species, like a lot of the legumes that I have listed on the right, we scarify those with either sandpaper or for large scale, I'll run them through some of the seed cleaning machines that can kind of scratch them up a little bit. But yeah, it's sometimes little nuances for certain species. Some go into double dormancy. I was hearing our propagator say that she has a really tough time with viburnum sometimes, but viburnum dentatum. She'll put them out in cold frames, and then 3 years later, they'll be popping up. So yeah, a lot of trial and error sometimes.
Exactly.
Great, yeah, and here on the top right is some real basic items that you'll need for plastic bags and sand, little spritzes of water, put your seed in there and label it and come back in a month or two.
Yeah, I would definitely make a point of saying that record keeping will help you with this. Yeah. Label everything, label it a couple of times, keep a log going, because 90 days you could forget when you put things in, and just keep yourself some reminders of when to pull things out of stratification.
Yeah, our propagator has endless records, and I'm always picking her brain. She's been doing this for 20 plus years, and it's still learning, and she could probably write volumes. But great. What I'm going through today for seed production is all herbaceous species. So, typically, and I've never really heard of large scale seed production with woody plants. So if you're getting into this kind of seed production, luckily you won't have to worry about some of those tougher woody species. But if you're doing it if you are doing it small scale and you have like a plant sale or something like that, I know Long Island Native Plant Initiative does do a lot of woody plants, trees and shrubs. So it's all, again, back to that scale. What kind of operation is going to fit best with your current operation. So,
and are you trying to talk about growing now, or is that in another slide that you want to?
So yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I had for propagation and pre-treatments. If you want to, I'm going to go into cultivation now, but if you want to continue.
Sure. I would just say a few things about sowing. So a lot of the really small seed, I see lobelia here, for instance, anything that's really, really tiny seed, we found a lot more success in surface sowing and just putting a light layer of sand, filtered sand that allows light to come through, but still holds the seed on the surface and traps in some moisture to keep the seed hydrated. And then there's other species that like a little light cover. So I think getting to know those little nuances, and I will share some resources for propagating seed that will give you a little bit more detail depending on the species as well.
Yeah, thanks, Alexis. That's a really good point. I mean, I think maybe general rule of thumb is the smaller the species, the seed, some of them are like literally powder. They're millions of seeds per pound. You don't even really, you can just almost just surface sow. And as Alexis said, maybe a tiny light layer of vermiculite or sand or something like that. But then the larger the seed, the deeper they're gonna have to go to propagate. And we do have a misting system. So that's really critical during that germination phase, is to not let those sow flats dry out. So keeping that constant moisture level is really critical for that germination phase. So on this slide, you can see greenhouse propagation, some seedlings of some kind of milkweed coming up there. Those will probably go out in the field that in a couple months. They look pretty small. I like to get them nice and robust. Sometimes you can even have your crop going for the entire season and do a fall planting. If you do a fall planting, I would recommend you get it in the ground, especially in the Northeast, before October 1st, because I'm sure as farmers, you're well aware of the term of frost heave. You don't want these babies that getting popped out of the ground if they're not rooted in properly. So I typically don't do fall plantings to establish my crops. I always get them in the spring. So that means an early on propagation, back to record keeping. You want to make sure that your stuff is stratified and ready to begin propagation in the greenhouse by February and March. So you have a good 2 to 3 months lead time to get those plants strong enough to get out the door and in the ground by June. I typically like to stop installing new plots by July 1st, just because of irrigation and you're not, soil hydrology is important to consider. Even though these natives are tough, you do have to water them in the beginning. And if you don't have reliable moisture or rain in the first few weeks of establishment, you can lose a crop if you're planting too late in the season into July. But so here's a couple of pictures. On the left is an installation at Floyd Bennett Field, the bulk production, and I have medium scale irrigation setup with a fire hydrant to get those watered in properly. And if you look at the bullet points here, these are important for foundation seed. I suggest propagating at least 100 live plugs per population per species to start a foundation plot. So that's, you know, from the wild collected seed, that's 3 populations, at least 100 per. So that's 300, at least 300 plugs for one species plot. And then plant plugs into prepared soil, preferably with weed fabric. I almost exclusively use weed fabric. I know that there's certain biodegradable weed fabrics that I have experimented around with a little bit, but I am still going with the plastic synthetic. I know it's not that eco-friendly, but I do get good use out of them. Some of them are down for over a decade. And you can recycle them sometimes. I mean, reuse it when you're ripping out a plot or the crop has served its time. Then you can sometimes reuse the same plot. And I don't do any amending. I've never actually added nitrogen or any kind of you know, fertilizers at all. I will get into, I think, next slide, a couple slides down, IPM and those kind of practices. So here is on the left, you can see me in the foundation production fields, and on the right, we have a team collecting a wild population of Solidago nemoralis, which is gray goldenrod. So this gray goldenrod is one of the parent populations in my production field. Through cross-pollination, the foundation seed becomes genetically rich eco-regional seed. This seed can meet small-scale local demand, but more importantly is the starter material for larger scale bulk production. All right, so on to a little more cultivation and weeding. I'm sure we're all aware of the importance of weeding. So as I said, I'm all organic and I don't use any herbicides. So I'm down on my hands and knees weeding with this extirpator tool, which is my go-to tool. And then pictured below it is a butane torch. I use this torch to burn through the weed fabric, opening up space in early spring for the crops to expand during their annual growth. So the torch avoids spraying and prolongs the lifespan of the fabric. Hand weeding and organic practices can become very labor intensive, especially the larger your production becomes. So large seed producers such as Ernst Seed rely on heavy herbicide and pesticide applications to maintain their crops. And then to the right, we have aphids overtaking a butterfly weed seed pod. That's Asclepias tuberosa. IPM practices will have to be considered for some crops, especially the milkweeds. Releasing beneficial insects such as ladybugs is a good way to stay organic, and repeated neem applications are also helpful. Good news is that I really limited just to the milkweeds. That's the only species that I have problems with. Aphids will decimate your crop especially if you have large stands and kind of monocultures. They just kind of explode in population. I know, Alexis, you're not cultivating in founder plots, but
yeah, I was gonna. Do you use beneficial insects? Do you release any?
I have. Well, we definitely do in the greenhouse.
Yeah.
I've thought about it in the field, but then I'm like, is that going to just be a waste of money? It's just like,
well, the ladybugs, yeah, they tend to come and find it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, they're definitely on there naturally. I've never bought ladybugs or lacewings or anything and released them outside onto my crop.
You could build lacewing boxes. You know, anyone can. There's plans online, and that could just to encourage your native populations to find the encourage them to set up shop and reproduce there. We do in the greenhouse, we do introduce beneficials on a pretty regular basis, and we've had some good luck with some predatory mites on the aphids, predatory midges actually.
Right.
and the aphids.
Yep. Definitely. Yeah, we've had good luck with greenhouse releases. I think we've done nematodes before too. All right, so deer browse is another thing to consider when you're trying to cultivate native seed plots. So some areas in New York City, believe it or not, face heavy deer pressure, mainly in Staten Island where I work. But fortunately, our nursery built a deer fence in 2016. Projects and clients often request quote unquote deer resistant species. However, the deer in Staten Island will even go after the recommended resistant species. I will use shade cloth, as you can see in these two pictures here, in order, so off-site, I have a couple other little small sites in Staten Island that don't have deer fences. So I inherited some plots, and the deer pressure in Staten Island has actually exponentially increased over my tenure. And I didn't want to just abandon these plots. So I figured out or devised a way with these shade cloth to keep the deer out. And the holes are large enough to allow pollinators to still get in there and do their thing. But subsequent to this, as the plots have spent their lifespan, I've learned that deer don't really go after graminoid species or grasses. So on these offsite plots that I don't have deer fence, I'm exclusively doing graminoids and grasses and sedges and rushes over there. So another good way to keep out unwanted fauna is to perhaps have a dog around. So that's my dog, Izzy. She's patrolling the switchgrass fields and keeping the deer, and we have Canada geese and groundhogs. But I'll have to say that the Canada geese and groundhogs don't really do much. It's really the deer. And our nursery is just kind of like a smorgasbord for deer, but luckily we have that deer fence now. And here's some bulk seed fields at Ernst, Pennsylvania, Ernst Seed. You can see that there's no ground cloth down there. Again, I was fortunate enough to get a tour out at Ernst and see their thousands of acres of production. They do have the monopoly of native seed production on the East Coast. But, speaking to organic farmers, they're certainly not doing this organically. They are better living by chemistry out there. Lots of pesticides, lots of herbicides to keep this under control. And you can still see Queen Anne's lace all throughout this, I think, wild bergamot plot here. And then finally, I want to mention before we head into the third section, the saying sleep, creep, and leap. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of that, especially if you're in the horticultural field. So it really is applicable to starting foundation seed plots or native seed production. So what it means is the first year that you install, the plants are kind of sluggish. They'll sleep. I mean, this is not across the board. There are certain species that you will get a nice yield off your first year, but the first year they generally sleep. Second year they creep, and then by the third year they're leaping, and that's when you're getting your big harvests. And the lifespan of a plot will depend on the species dependent. I've had some that kind of crash and burn after about 4 or 5 years, and then I've had some plots that are still going after 10 years. Little blue stem, for example, is great. These plants seem to be really long-lived, and they're over a decade old. And then some, obviously, if you're doing annuals and biennials, that's another whole approach to farming, because you're gonna start getting all these F1 generation, and I allow that to happen just because ease of cultivation and production. You're getting all of those volunteers and all of that, the subsequent generations. But if you want to keep your genetics rich, always source from wild collected seed and add that into the mix so that you keep those genetics diverse. All right, so we're into the third topic, harvesting and seed cleaning. Again, with each slide, you can begin to think what scale would be most appropriate for your operation. Here are pictured hand pruners. Those will be your go-to tool, and they're certainly mine. We also have small handheld seed strippers. I got this from Prairie Habitats. It's a company out of in Canada, but it's now sold at seedburrow.com. It works great with little brushes inside this machine that gently strip the mature seeds into a hopper. And you can kind of imagine going down your plot with that. But I kind of still exclusively rely on hand pruners. And then if you're a little bit medium scale, not quite bulk scale, you could think about this ATV brush harvester. So a little more about harvesting. I mean, the great thing about hand harvesting is that you can repeatedly harvest over the entirety of the maturation window. Therefore, you're capturing all of that genetic diversity. And some species have months and months of maturation window, like black-eyed Susan. I know that Holly doesn't classify black-eyed Susan as technically a native. I should maybe rethink things. But I've been farming that one for a while. So the, you know, of course, the larger your plots are, the more time-consuming hand harvesting can become. Harvesting is all about timing. So you want to pay attention to seasonal changes and test seed heads on a weekly basis for maturity. Some species have very short maturation windows, and if a storm blows through, the seed heads could shatter, potentially losing your crop. I know, Alexis, you've probably been out there wild collecting and have targeted populations, and you think you're going to go get some seed, and then you wait maybe a couple days too late and it's gone.
Yeah, especially happens with the late ripening seeds like the asters and New England aster. We're always fighting the first frost. But yes, going back out several times and really knowing when your seed is due to be ripe. So you can go and flag your plants. If you're doing wild collection, go back out and keep checking on them. I'll send a file with some dates and a list of native plants that we usually, target month of when their seed is going ripe. But, again, with the drought that's happened and with changes in temperature, things can be very wacky from year to year. So.
Yep. Here's a photo of a gentleman, looks like he's wild seed collecting, but he's just got some buckets tied around his belt. Our seed collectors use saddlebags. So you're walking through with hand clippers or your bare hands, stripping the ripe seed into your containers. And then on the other side of the scale here with bulk production, this is what Ernst would use with the large seed producers out west. This has been on my wish list. I really would love one of these flail-back seed strippers. It attaches to the bucket loader of a tractor, and you can go down windrows of your crops. And again, it kind of acts like that handheld seed stripper that we had on the previous slide, has brushes under there and a hopper. And the good thing about this is you can actually pass through crops repeatedly over the maturation window. So something like all of these warm season grasses that you need on large scale, like little blue stem, that have those fluffy seeds that mature at different times, this would be a great machine for that. All right, so once you're done harvesting, the next step before seed cleaning is to properly dry the material down. It's very important to have a well ventilated a lot of air circulation facility where you're spreading this material out and preventing mold to occur. Mold will, if you have matted material that doesn't breathe, then the mold can literally destroy your crop. So this process can take a few weeks, sometimes up to a month, depending on how the quantity of material or the type of material that you're drying down. So also look out for rodents. These little guys have been a bane of my existence. I've now figured out ways to I have these super sack bags that are breathable that I've been suspending from the rafters. And, you know, I know that rodents can be quite acrobatic, but it's definitely harder for them to get up into these bags down a rope into this material. But throughout every step of the way, once you're finishing drying your material down and then going to the seed cleaning, it's important to just really clean up after yourself. If you're leaving material overnight, rodents will just get in there and leave their droppings everywhere and eat a lot of your seed. So once the material is dried down, you can start the process of seed cleaning or seed extraction. This is what I'd recommend for a beginner just starting out on a small scale. It's a very small investment to make for some screens, some sieves, and a threshing box with these are like rubber mats with a wooden handle with another rubber mat that you're gently scrubbing the seed to release it from any kind of bract that it might be in, or any kind of pod. And then once you have that chaff material and those seeds that are released, you can sieve it out or screen it out using a method such as this.
Yeah, I can interject. We use the glove mat method, which is very similar to the rubber mat. It's a ribbed car mat inside of a plastic bin and a rubber glove, and you rub the seeds over it, especially all of the ones with the pappus. It really helps separate it out if you're trying to get it down to seed very quickly, and then dumping it over some sieves to separate it out some more.
Right. Yeah. To go along with that, back to what you just mentioned, the pappus, the seeds that have the fluff, all those asters and things. You know, if you're on a real small scale, you don't necessarily need to get all of that off of there. The seed cleaning machines that for large scale producers, it starts to get into a storage issue or a sellable issue with the product. If you're producing mass quantities that you need to get that pappus off. But of course, it doesn't affect the germination if you don't remove it. So here's a machine that will remove that pappus. And if you're going to invest in any kind of seed cleaning machine, there's two that I suggest. This one is called a brush machine. It's definitely a worthwhile investment. The brush machine is a first step that saves a lot of time. It's great for many species as it gently removes the pappus or the fluff that is on so many of our natives, such as asters, goldenrods, joe pies, a lot of the warm season grasses. The brush machine is also great at scrubbing seeds out of pods or bract-like structures without damaging the seed. And you choose different cylinders that have different screens or hole size according to your species, so that these brushes are brushing the seed through and not scraping them or damaging them, because you do risk damage if you're not choosing the proper screen. So I would say more than 2/3 of the species I produce can be processed through a brush machine out of the 75 that I do. So that's, you know, almost 50 that I would say can go through this machine. You can literally process tens of pounds of material in a matter of a couple hours, potentially saving you days of hand processing work. The best manufacturer for this machine is Westrup, and I have links to that in the document I'll share, which is a Danish company. So that is the first machine I'd recommend. And the second one is this tabletop clipper on the left. This is the finisher. So if you have the brush machine, you kind of need the clipper, because the clipper is going to take the material from the brush machine and whittle it down to the pure live seed. And the clipper works with airflow and screens. So again, if you're thinking about processing pounds of pure live seed per year per species, then you're going to need at least a clipper, but probably both the brush machine and the clipper. And then this is a cool picture of, I've seen all shapes, sizes, and ages of clippers, and you know, a lot of the seed cleaning equipment is adapted from the agricultural industry. This is a pretty funky looking one here, and I've seen ones that are multi-stories tall. And then into, you know, more funky looking machines that are like more for bulk production. You have gravity tables, debearders, which are great for taking that little on off of the warm season grasses. And then a hammer mill, which is great for things that are kept in really hard woody pods. Like I put the, I have a hammer mill and I put the primrose through the hammer mill. If you think about a primrose pod, it's almost like woody, releasing all of those seeds. All right, so that wraps up harvesting and seed cleaning. Onto banking and warehousing. So I'd like to go through this pure live seed and seed label. These will become necessary depending on the quantities that you are producing and who you are marketing your seed. Contractors often require labels with pure live seed results for purchase. I submit cleaned samples of each species on an annual basis to the USDA National Seed Laboratory in Dry Branch, Georgia for testing. On the right is an example of a pure live seed test result. Pure live seed value is determined by multiplying the percent purity by the percent germination. So each PLS test gives a purity analysis or the percent of the sample that is actual seed versus chaff, and also a viability analysis or the percent germination of the seeds in the sample. So, you know, back to people actually purchasing the seed, the clients require these tests to ensure that they're only buying seed that has the potential to germinate and not chaff or unviable seed. So Alexis, for your operation, do you do any kind of viability analysis or testing?
Right, so we're just using it obviously internally, but we want to know that we're going to get good germination and we have good seed present. So we tend to do more basic testing. We do a cut viability test. So we basically, under a microscope for many of the seeds, you cut the seed, you take a sample of this, 3 to 5 seeds or 1 to 10, up to 10 seeds, and you cut them to see if you've got that embryo and that endosperm, if the seed is full, then we consider it viable. If you're getting 2 or 3 that are empty or brown or not looking healthy, then we would call that non-viable. And so you have 2 out of 5 are viable, etc. So we know how to proceed when we're going to go sow them or use them. So that's one of the tests that we use most reliably. We also have an aspirator, which is a tool that uses compressed air to sort the heavier seeds from the lighter seeds, and that's another way. And then you can also do float testing for some of the heavier seeds, and the ones that float we consider have a viable endosperm, and the ones that sink have a viable endosperm, and the ones that float we tend to just not count. We'll usually still throw them in when we're sowing them, but we won't count on their germination. So those are some lower tech ways and smaller scale ways of checking your viability.
Great, that's good that you still count them in just in case they do germinate, so that you're not selecting for any particular type of genetic variability. And that goes back to seed cleaning too. There's different little chutes and compartments that come out of the clipper, and you can do those cursory glance cut tests or whatever to see if they're viable. But often I'll put like a chaffy lot into the alongside the pure live seed clean, so that you're not discarding any seeds that just happen to be a different shape or size or weight. And then I'll throw that in, for free, or whatever on when it goes out the door for a project. So let's see, the next one, continuing on with banking, warehousing. This is a photo of our seed bank, the Mid-Atlantic Regional Seed Bank and the Greenbelt Native Plant Center, which is basically a modified walk-in cooler. As our director, Ed Toth, described in Tuesday's roundtable, you can think of this kind of banking as a savings and loan. The seed is meant to be propagated or used in seed-based restoration, getting into the ecosystems as quickly as possible for habitat restoration. I like to see my foundation of bulk seed go out the door in 3 years or less. The temperature in this bank is kept steady at about 55 degrees Fahrenheit and humidity around 15 to 20%. So for this type of short-term storage, seed can stay viable up to 15 years, depending on the species. But some species such as asters and joe pies can lose viability rapidly over just a matter of a couple years. I often submit samples for retesting if they're older than 5 years. Seed testing is another cost associated with native seed production and can become quite pricey at about sometimes up to $200 for a sample to go to the lab. And Alexis, what kind of storage do you guys have for your seeds?
We have a very similar seed room with controlled humidity, about 50 degrees, less than 15%, 15% humidity, and we have the same thing. It's very well organized by year. We do hang on to seed for a number of years, but we always do a cut test and evaluation before we go and use it. And then of course we do a wide variety of seeds. So some of our seed is intolerant of dry storage and is kept in a fridge, but that definitely needs to be used, and at least within a year. Sometimes you can stretch it. So
yeah, like the recalcitrant species such as oaks and hickories.
Yeah, and some of the actaeas, anything with a fleshy fruit is usually does not store well. I mean, there are exceptions, but some of the carex, Pennsylvanica is one that we usually don't try to store, but we're doing tests to see if they can. But yeah, some things just can't be dried down. They lose viability very quickly.
Right. Yeah, the larger the seed, usually the more intolerant they are of being dried, desiccated down.
Yeah, a lot of the woodland species, So.
Yep, and I don't know if the audience can see this shot here on the right is the size of our wild seed collections. These are alphabetical by species, so in these small envelopes are from wild accessions. On the back wall is my foundation seed. So you're in these bags. This is the quantity of seed you're talking about. This is per species per year. You're talking about multiple pounds. And then on the left here, these large scale 50-pound bulk seed. This is more of a bulk type scale. Right. And then, the warehousing, just to mention this really quick, out west again, there's a national seed warehouse system. They're banking hundreds of thousands, if not millions of seeds for the demand out west for the restoration, prairie habitat and wildfire restorations. Here's a cool quote, getting into the practical side of things. Restored ecosystems should provide immediate benefits in the form of soil stabilization, biotic diversification, and the necessary forage and food to support dependent flora and fauna. The basic building blocks are genetically appropriate native plant materials. So restored ecosystems must function to be a success. Using genetically appropriate native plant materials will give you the best chance of that success. All right, so on to the fifth and final section here, which is the practical side of things and restoration, seed-based restoration ecology. It's important first to understand obviously back to the ecoregions, the areas, the habitats that the seed that you are producing will be used to restore. Obviously, I'm working in New York City, which is one of the largest urban areas in the world. And by looking at these maps, you can see that the human imprint is quite visible. The dramatic loss of habitat has greatly fragmented our green spaces, but with protection, over 10,000 acres of forest, wetlands, and meadows remain. This map doesn't include the 27,000 acres of national parks land that's surrounding the Jamaica Bay region and New York Harbor that I had mentioned earlier with our bulk seed production. So it's really good to get an initial list of species that you think would be best for your production. And once your operation expands, you can think about developing diverse mixes that would be appropriate for regional habitat restoration. I have listed all the species I have in production thus far, and the local habitat mixes that I have for clients. All right, so seed prices. Native seed prices are based on a per pound pure live seed basis, and they vary greatly. If you take a look up and down this, have A through M here on the list, you'll see some crazy variation of $20 a pound to $2,000 a pound. And why is that? It's obviously species dependent, and it's mainly due to seed size. So something like partridge pea, Camercrista fasciculata, has 72,000 seeds per pound. Sounds like a lot, but it's actually one of the largest seeds. Whereas purple toad flax, this one down at the bottom, has millions, tens of millions of seeds per pound. It's about 30 million seeds per pound. It's almost like powder. So seed size dictates price per pound. Also the yield capacity of that species and the difficulty of cultivation and processing seed cleaning. And these fluctuate a little bit annually. I always look on the market to adjust my annual prices depending on other seed producers that are producing the same species. And also a quick glance at potential clients that you can market your seed to. Like I said, other organic or local farmers, private residents or community gardens, local plant nurseries, government agencies. If you start getting larger, the DEP, DEC, and DOT. I'm developing partnerships with state and city DOT. So those are great partnerships to develop because certain states, I know New York State and New Jersey, are implementing laws about roadside native seeding. Also conservation nonprofits, county and state parks are also good clients. And then on the right, I have a seeding recommendations document that I hand out to every client. There are a lot of factors to consider to ensure a successful seeding operation, as I will discuss in some upcoming slides. So you'll find that you will perhaps, as I do, develop an emotional investment in the seed you produce. And although you might not be directly involved with the actual ecological restoration seeding operation, you will want to educate your clients on how to successfully get the seed on the ground. I find that project managers and contractors are open and willing to accept as much information as I can provide, as they have oftentimes have little to no experience working with native seed, because this is kind of a relatively new industry out here in the East. Cool, so get more into the practical use of seed-based restoration. So the first step, once you've determined an appropriate species mix for any given site or habitat that you're restoring, the site preparation is really the first critical step. Whether you're doing this on your own property or just providing the seed to a contractor, it's always good practice to have multiple seasons of prep work, including invasive control and cover cropping. So, you know, this guy out here is most likely doing some kind of herbicide treatment, invasive control. Obviously, if you want to stay organic, you're going to be doing a lot of hand pulling and labor-intensive work to eradicate those invasives. But again, you know, multiple seasons of this before you want to put your mix down, because your mix is just going to get swallowed up if you don't get rid of those invasives first. Alexis, have you done any of restoration, meadow restoration or anything like that, seed-based?
Yeah, mostly we are producing them to plug size, and then the plugs are being planted out for meadows. But I know a lot of our clients who buy them will often do seeding as well as plugs. And they're always, coming up with ways of clearing out the site. So depending on the size, you can, do the lasagna mulching. We did a really good planting here at Nasami, but just covering kind of a parking lot bed with cardboard and smothering the turf. It was turf grass. So there are some very inventive ways to zero your site without having to till or add pesticides.
Right. Yep. And another good one up on the right, if you can, do a controlled burn. I've been burning things sometimes without permission. No, it's always good to get permission. So site preparation continued. Once you get those invasives out of there, the second critical step is cover cropping. And as farmers, you're all well aware of what a cover crop is and what it does. But since we're talking about native plants, I've been developing 2 native cover crops that do the job even better than agricultural cover crops. One being Elamis virginicus, which is Virginia wild rye, and the other one, Camecrista fasciculata, which is partridge pea. So, they perform better or just as well as agricultural cover crops in the first few seasons of establishment, holding the soil and keeping out invasives as the perennials, warm season grasses, and the main seed mix establish. It can take multiple years, up to 3 to 4 or 5 years for that main mix to come in. So you really need these fast germinating covers to come in there and hold the ground and keep the invasives out. But the major benefit of using native cover crops in a natural setting is that they fade out of the landscape faster than agricultural covers, and they do not compete with the final native mix. So once site preparation is complete, it's time to actually apply your fulls and your main mix. So here's a photo of hand broadcasting. If you have a small site, usually less than half an acre, you can get away with hand broadcasting. You're going to have to rake it in to a depth of no more than ½ an inch. And it's okay to step all over that seed because you want good soil to seed contact. Also, if you're working on a slope like this guy, you're going to probably consider, or a good idea to consider, erosion control, like a jute mesh. Because if you're doing especially a fall seeding, or any year, I would say, or any season, it's good to use erosion control measures because, as you know, high rain event or a high snow melt, you're going to lose all of your seed. And it also helps a bit with predation. If flocks of geese or something get in there. But that's kind of on a small scale. And then on a larger scale, we're talking about native seed drill machines that are pulled by tractors. The 2 companies that dominate the market for seed drills are Truax and Great Plains. This is what's done out west for large-scale multi-acre prairie restorations. But again, this can be applied in the Northeast when you're doing multi-acre seed restoration. Of course, these are large machines, harder to navigate in and out of. It would be hard to be doing a woodland restoration with this, or impossible. So more on the line for grasslands and meadows. But the great thing about these seed drills is they account for seed size. There's 3 different boxes or bins. Where my arrow is, there's a bin for the large, fluffy, warm season grasses, a medium-sized seed bin, and a powdery, fine seed bin, and they're all drilled to the appropriate depth. So the large seed, fluffy seed is drilled deepest, and the fine powdery seed is just dispersed on the top of the soil. And some nice photos of some restored landscapes. So these were actually done with seed drills, and I believe most of these were out west. So I don't have any really good photos of large scale restorations done here. A lot of the restorations that I'm working on are in the city are urban landscapes and woodlands. We're doing a lot of woodland restorations. I have done a few meadow restorations, and I have to keep after, recontact the contractors or the project managers to get feedback and go do site visits to see how the seed is coming up. All right, now I have a couple, I don't know how we're doing with time, but I have a couple pretty good actual site surveys to go through and how the seed was used on these sites, practical uses. So this large-scale restoration project that our team, our entire division has been working on at New York City Parks is called Oakwood Beach. It's in Staten Island. So Oakwood Beach was one of the most devastated areas in all of New York City after Hurricane Sandy. Bungalow communities were destroyed, condemned, and are now part of the New York State Rising Buyout and Acquisition Program. So these pictures were taken right after the storm and depict the damage and debris fields left behind. Much of this area is now being restored to natural landscapes due to the buyout program. So for the most part, all you can really see are dense fields of Phragmites. But in the middle of the frag, where I have my pointer here, are small hummocks dotting the landscape. And it's really on these hummocks that we found the native diversity. So on the hummocks, we surveyed over 85 different native plant species representing 41 different plant families, 8 New York State listed species with 6 additional locally imperiled species. The combined hummock acreage approximated 6.5 acres. So this is the beginning of the plant palette that will be used to restore wetlands in the buyout areas. So the whole area where these bungalows were taken down encompasses, tens of acres formerly urban landscapes that we're gonna use these hummocks as inspiration for what the planting species palette should be on these new natural sites. So as I was saying, the site survey is the inspiration for what will be resilient and what will help to protect this area in the future. And then these are some photos of the species on the hummocks. All right, so this is a seed mix calculator that I used to determine quantities for a pollinator wet meadow at Oakwood Beach. So this was a 1.4 acre seeding operation to restore a section of wet meadow at Oakwood Beach. And this is, I'll have a link to this as well in my documents that I send over. I originally got this seed mix calculator from the Xerces Society website, and it's perfect for native seed mix, making native seed mixes, because you can plug in and manipulate these columns up here. First of all, putting all of your species in, the percent per species in the mix. Each species has a, seeds per pound. And this calculator takes into account the seeds per pound. So you can see something like slender leaf goldenrod, Euphemia graminifolia has 5,600,000 seeds per pound, whereas Panicum brigatum switchgrass is only 259,000 per pound. So this seed mix calculator takes that into account. Then you can put your area or your acreage in and your price per pound per species. And the nice little algorithm in the calculator will give you your grand total down here. So for 1.4 acres, the contractor paid $4,600 for this mix. Of course, the more diverse the mix, the more expensive it's going to be. You could use cheaper species. And then lately, this project was a few years ago. Lately, I've been keeping partridge pea, the Camecrista fasciculata, and the Elemis out of the mix, and doing that beforehand, working with the contractors beforehand to hand those as cover crops multiple seasons before the main mix goes down. So in this case, this was actually part of this mix. But yeah, this is a great little tool to have if you start playing around with seed mixes. Oh, another thing I want to add is that generally speaking, when you're making a mix, whether any habitat, whether it's woodland, grassland, maritime grassland, wet meadow, dry meadow, whatever, you should, a general rule of thumb is to have 60% graminoids, 60% grasses, sedges, rushes, and 40% wildflowers. So, you know, when you're manipulating your percent columns, you want to tally it up to make sure that you have 60%, at least 50 or 60% of your species as graminoids. And then it's good always to throw in a biennial or two, and then the annuals you can keep out as your cover crops. And then I guess another general rule of thumb is the seeding rate. In New York City, we kind of have a standard seeding rate of 30 pounds of pure live seed per acre. It's kind of high. I think out west there it's a little bit lower, maybe around 20, but just because of the crazy amount of invasives that we're dealing with here in this urban jungle, I recommend a higher rate at 30 pounds of pure live seed. In a woodland restoration, you could probably get away with 20 pounds per acre. And that's it for that calculator. So on to some more real urban landscapes that I have to deal with. So these are some examples of some urban plant communities and how to focus getting native seed into these tough places. So oftentimes in highly altered urban settings, you'd have to kind of run a sort of habitat simulation to determine an appropriate planting palette. A lot of times a site will also have good historical records of pre-existing flora. When running the simulation, first assess the site conditions. A shady wet site might be best simulated as a forested wetland. A shady dry site can be an upland forest. A sunny wet site would be an open upland with wet to moist meadows. And a sunny dry site would be a dry meadow or a grassland. As New York City's native seed producer, I'm asked to make custom mixes for sites throughout the city. Here's an example of a standard urban restoration mix, also used for the DOT partnership I'm developing. So these are some of the toughest of the tough species, yet they represent some of the biggest pollinator plant groups, such as milkweeds, goldenrods, and asters. So this mix would be applicable in many urban landscapes. And as I mentioned, great for right-of-way and roadside as well. And a couple cool photos of how native plants have adapted to the built landscape. It's through these plant species and their natural habitats that you begin to understand how they can be used in functional designs and restorations. And on the left, that's Virginia creeper wrapping around an abandoned car in the Bronx. In the middle, we have salt marsh cordgrass growing through an old boat in Jamaica Bay, Queens. And then another photo of my dog Izzy next to some seaside goldenrod growing through some cracks in Red Hook, Brooklyn. All right, Alexis, do you have anything to add on anything related to these sites or urban landscapes?
No, I think you did a great job.
All right. So I think because we're talking about a lot of meadows and prairie restorations, it's good to go through an a forest woodland restoration. This site is on Randall's Island, and I've kind of called it an urban forest because it is a shaded woodland that we want to restore. This is some photos of the site. It's on a steep slope, lots of obstructions. Bottom left, you can see some of the saplings that they had just planted, some trees and shrubs there. But you know, what's great about the evolution of our division and ecologists in New York City parks is that we are going away from just this woody restoration. We're starting to think more about succession and using herbaceous species as successional. So you can't just have this climax ecosystem right away, plant the trees and go, because these small saplings will get overtaken by invasives really quick. So you have to think about succession and account for the herbaceous layer. I think, Alexis, there on the bottom right here, it looks like they're doing a method that you referred to earlier, like covering, like tarping the ground and literally smothering.
Yes,
smothering.
It's very effective, even for some really tough weeds and invasives. You just have to make sure there's no light getting in and give it a good amount of time. But then you can pile, you can wait and then plant right into that and mulch over it, or you can, if you don't have the time to wait, you can add, you know, a layer of loam and local compost to it and plant into that. But we've had great success with it. And you're saving all your soil biota. You know, that's the reason that we love it so much, is you're not killing off anything, and you're not tilling it up. So
yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that local compost and staying local. The thing that is really frustrating about working in the 5 boroughs is that I'm primarily working on fill soil, and this is foreign soil that is just conducive to invasive encroachment. I mean, the invasives thrive in this fill soil. So as Polly and Hope were saying earlier in the session 1, that soil is the microbiota of the soil have established and evolved together with the roots of these native plants for millennia. And that's gone now in a lot of the sites I'm working in. So how can you restore that native soil? It's kind of almost impossible to restore that native soil in an area like this, but hopefully up in the Northeast, you have areas that are not as altered, and you're working with landscapes where some of that microbiology in the soil is still intact. So the goals of this project, just cover the shady ground, control erosion on slopes, deal with a basic pH, deal with compact and fill soil, outcompete the invasive gallium ground cover, incorporate native plants into the rocky slope, and deal with salt spray from the above expressway. Kind of a lot to deal with. But here's some good suggestions for this shady environment that can deal with a lot of this. Hay-scented fern, white snakeroot, whitewood aster, flattened oakgrass, Danthonia, and GM canadense, white avens, and just Jampsia flexuosa, which is wavy hair grass. And then when I came into the project for the seed mix, there was a long trail, a narrow trail, but a mile or so long that they needed seeded. I called it a woodland and trailside mix, as partial shade. And these are the species that I incorporated into that mix. One I'd like to point out for woodland restorations, and this applies all the way up in the Northeast, is path rush. It's named path rush just because of what it does. It grows right along footpaths. You probably step on it all the time. And it's great for covering the ground too. The germination isn't quite as reliable as you know, some of the annual cover crops and things, but when you get a good lot that you've tested and know that's good, it will come up. But it does need a good amount of stratification, cold treatment time. But yeah, I did use Elemis as kind of the cover crop on this project.
Just a 2-minute warning here before the session officially ends. I just want to remind folks, please fill out the survey I've been putting in the chat, and also save the chat as Stephanie had instructed. There's those 3 dots down below where you type in your messages so you can record all these great resources that have been shared. Michael, I'll let you all finish. I just wanted to interject before folks started signing off with that.
Great, yeah, we're nearly done here. I didn't even know if I'd get to this project here, but continuing on with the Randall's Island project, there was a little bit of a wet meadow there that good species to stabilize this slope and are flooding and salt tolerant. Some examples are New York ironweed, Vernonia, annual woolly bean, Stropostyles, milkweed, common milkweed, Asclepias syriaca, Helianthus giganteus, which is giant sunflower, Indian hemp, Opossum cannabinum, and American germander, Teucrium canadense. And actually, this is the last couple slides. So this is the native species planting guide. Let me go ahead and attach that document to the chat. And that's it. Alexis, do you have anything else you want to add?
That's a beautiful slide of purple lovegrass.
Yeah, that's my
It's lovely.
literally my favorite warm season grass is purple lovegrass.
I would say a lot of these can be used for native lawn alternatives too. We really push that here, getting rid of your turf lawns and putting in some native grasses such as purple lovegrass can really increase our biodiversity in especially our built landscapes. So.
Well, great. Let me see if I can find how to.
While you're finding that, I just want to thank Alexis and Michael, as well as Polly and Hope, who've been fielding all of these great questions in the chat. For our first Ecotypic Seed School, I'm so honored to be in the presence of all of this such important knowledge that hopefully for all of the attendees out there will help you if you weren't already working with native or ecotypic seed, have some background information and resources that can help you get started. Certainly the Ecotype project, we're here as a resource and can connect you to all of these great folks who have been presenting throughout the conference. And we really hope that you do fill out the survey so we can see what you learned, what we missed, how we could be more effective, and just see who starts to actually implement this ecotypic seed on their land. So please stay in touch with us. And again, thank you so much to the presenters and to the great organizers of this wonderful conference. And I put some links in the chat for the CT NOFA's Organic Land Care accreditation course that we also run. And all of us together, the more of us that are helping to fortify our shared living seed banks, proliferating these ecological corridors with these right plants for the right place, we all do our part in land stewardship and caretaking. And thank you all so much for joining us. So if anyone else on the panel has anything else to say.
Sorry to interrupt, Sefra, there was a question in the chat if you would like Canadians to fill out the survey.
Yes, absolutely. Anyone who's on the call, certainly we'd love to know where you are and if you're working with ecotypic seed or how you'll implement this knowledge. Hopefully, since we're working on an eco-regional framework, this model can be applied to wherever you are, even beyond the Northeast region. And also, you know, I would really, if folks are interested in actually working with ecotypes and want to know where they can source it, we'll work to create a list of that. So if you reach out, my email again is sefra@ctnofa.org. I'll put it in the chat, but please reach out to me in for that facet as well. Does anyone else have anything else they want to say? Hope, Polly, Alexis, Michael?
Thank you all for joining.
Thank you.
Oh, no. Yeah, thank you.
Reach out with any additional questions.
I just want to recognize Sefra for her vision in putting this together and all of those that helped her to do it. I think this was a really critically important step for us to continue to move forward ecotypic seed production in the Northeast.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sefra.
No, it's my pleasure. It's I often make the joke. Some people think it's funny bringing all these seed celebrities together. It's a pleasure to be around such expertise, and hopefully, as we all work together, we can continue to do these educational type events and help spread this knowledge to all those that are interested in stewarding these seeds that have been here since, you know, from all the ancestors before us for all that come after us. So thank you all again and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Right. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.
And just real quick, everyone on the call, I'm going to save the chat, but it isn't going to be able to save the links in it, I think. But all of our presenters seem really into being reached out to. So please reach out to anyone, and we'd love to share more knowledge with you if there's a link that you aren't able to get later.
Right, and anyone who fills out the survey, then once we have that resource list made, we can email it back to those folks as well. So another great incentive for filling out that survey.
Alrighty, thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you.
All right, cheers, everybody.